Math 110, the hyperbola, section 7.3. Now, hyperbola is the set of all points in a plane for which the absolute value of the difference of the distances from two fixed points, the foci, and these are the two foci displayed here, is constant. And the midpoint of the segment between the foci is going to be the center of the hyperbola. So the midpoint of this foci and this foci would be right here, and that's going to be the center of our hyperbola. Now here's going to be the standard equation for the hyperbola. Once again, it can either transverse over the horizontal or it can be transverse over the vertical, very similar to the ellipse. Now the only difference here is our a squared is always going to be under the positive value, whereas on the ellipse the a squared was the biggest value. It doesn't matter if a squared is bigger than b squared here. The a squared is always going to be under the positive value. And so we still have the same elements of h and k being your center. The vertices, you're going to be adding and subtracting your a. The foci, you're going to be adding and subtracting your c. To find your c, it's going to be a different equation. This time, c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And then if you notice from this drawing here, these asymptotes are going to be of these equations here when it's transversing over the horizontal. And these are the set of equations when it's transversing over the vertical. Notice that now the a squared is under the y, and that's the positive value. You're adding and subtracting a on your k. You're adding or subtracting c on your k. To find c, it's the same exact equation. Now for your asymptotes, okay, there is a small change, but you're still using the basic formulas for that. So our first example, it says find an equation of the hyperbola with the vertices 0, -4, and 0, 4, and the foci 0, -6, and 0, 6. So we know that a is 4 and c is 6 because if we have our center, we know that -4 is moving up and down, and then same here, our c, because it's from that 0, it's moving up 6 and down 6. And so I need to find what my b squared is going to be. So plugging 6 in for c, plugging 4 in for a, and solving for b here, we're going to get b squared equaling 20. Now since it's changing along the y-axis, I know it's going to be transversing over the y-axis, so I know I'm going to have to use the equation that has it transversing over the y-axis. Notice the a squared is under the y. And so now that I know what my b squared is, I can take all those values and I can plug it in. Since my center is 0, 0, that's why it says y minus 0 squared and x minus 0 squared. And so simplifying that, you're going to get y squared over 16 minus x squared over 20 equals 1. Once again, I want to point out a squared is no longer the idea that it's the biggest value. A squared is now whatever the positive value is. Example number 2, it says for the hyperbola given 9x squared minus 16y equals 144. Find the vertices, the foci, and the asymptotes. Then graph it. So our standard equation says this has to equal 1, so I have to divide everything by 144. And so I'm going to get the equation x squared over 16 minus y squared over 9 equals 1. My x is positive, right? The x squared part is positive. So I'm going to be using the equations where it's going to be transversing over the horizontal. And so for my vertices, my a is 4, my b is going to be 3, my h is 0, my k is 0. So I can take these values, h 0, a 4, k 0, etc., and I can plug everything in. And so my vertices are going to be -4, 0, and 4, 0. To find the foci, I have to find what c is, so I have to plug in what my a and b is, and that's going to be 16 plus 9, and so my c is going to be 5. And so plugging c, k, and h into my foci equations, h is 0, c is 5, k is 0, etc., you're going to get the foci to be -5, 0, and 5, 0. So now that I know these values, finding my asymptotes, these are just the equations straight from those definitions. All you have to do is just plug in the values. My k is 0, my b is 3, my a is 4, x is the same, my h is 0, and I did the same thing here, and so you're going to get y equals 3/4 x and y equals negative 3/4 x. So now having all that information here off to the side, now we're going to graph it. So like I said, because I know that the x squared is the positive one, I know it's going to transverse over the x-axis. And so plotting my center, I know this is going to be 0 here. Now my a means that it's going to extend out for this way and extend out for that way. And then because of my b, I know it's going to extend out 3 this way and 3 that way. And then I can, generally what we do is we kind of like draw this box because this is going to help us draw our asymptotes in a moment. Now I have to plot my foci. And so my foci, we said, are negative 5, 0, and 5, 0. And so I can plot them here and here. And so now my asymptotes, if you noticed here, I drew this line that went from one corner, passes through the center, and goes out through the other corner. That asymptote that I have there is represented by these equations, and that one is going to be the second one. And so now if we draw the hyperbola, what it's going to look like is as if there's like these parabolas that extend from the vertices that we have plotted here. And so it'll look similar like this. Now just make sure that these parabola looking graphs here, they kind of want to hug these asymptotes. So the way that you want to draw them is you draw them like they're kind of approaching those asymptotes, like so. Example number 3, it wants us to graph that hyperbola that's in general form. And so just like with the ellipse, just like with the circle, we have to put it into standard form because it's just easier to graph that way. So I want to group my y's together and I want to group my x's together. Now notice just by looking at it, because the negative is in front of the x squared, immediately I know that it's going to transverse over the y because my y is positive. So now grouping my y's together, grouping my x's together, I subtracted the 28 from both sides. Now to complete the square, I had to factor out the 4, b over 2 squared, and here I factored out the negative. And so b over 2 squared, 6 over 2 is 3 squared. 3 squared gave me 9. I added and subtracted 9 on the inside there. To do that with the x, negative 4 over 2 squared was 4, and so I added and subtracted 4 inside the parentheses where the x's are grouped. Now these factor, and so this would factor into y minus 3 squared. The negative 9 is still there. This factors into x minus 2 squared. The negative 4 is still there. That 4 is still in the front of this bracket. That negative is still in the front of this bracket. And so now I have to distribute that 4 to both of those terms and the negative to both of those terms. And so I'm going to get 4 parentheses y plus 3 squared minus 36. And then that negative distributing, I'm going to get negative x minus 2 squared, and then negative is a positive 4. So I can add the 36 to both sides. I can subtract the 4 to both sides. And so I'm going to get 4 times y plus 3 squared minus x minus 2 squared. We're almost there. It has to equal 1, so I have to divide everything by 4. And so doing that, now we have it in our standard form, y plus 3 squared minus x minus 2 squared over 4 equals 1. And so this is going to be my standard form equation. Now notice, because there was nothing there, I just put that placeholder 1 to just kind of help us out. So now finding all the information, my center is going to be 2, negative 3. There's my h, there's my k. And it's going to transverse the vertical because my y is positive. So I'm going to use the vertical vertices formula that it had. Just plug in the values and you get 2, negative 4, 2, negative 2. Now I have to find the asymptotes. And so I know what my a is, I know what my b is. I know what my h and k is, and so plugging those values in, I get these equations for my asymptotes. Finding my c, I have to plug in 1 for a, I have to plug in 4 for b, and I get c equals the square root of 5. So for my foci equations that were under the transversing the y, plug in h, plug in k, plug in c, and so you're going to get these values here. So now taking all of that information again to graph it, my center is 2, 3. And so now I know it's going to extend out 2, and it's going to extend up and down 1, because that's the distance of my A, that's the distance in my B. And so doing that whole box thing, because that's going to help us graph the asymptotes. Remember, it passes through the corner, through the center, and through the other corner. Corner, center, corner. And that's represented by these two graphs here. Now for the foci, this you'd have to enter into your calculator, -3 minus radical 5, and -3 plus radical 5, and you're going to get these 2 points right here. And now the last part is just to graph the actual hyperbola portion. We have everything else labeled, and so just remember it starts at the vertices and it looks like those parabola looking things, and what they want to do is they want to hug the asymptotes. And now we have our graph of the hyperbola. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments.